Hey guys, before we get started, can somebody give me a thumbs up or a yes? Anything just to let me know that I'm coming through. Does that mean you can hear me or see me, Holly? There, thank you, Douglas. Excellent, guys, excellent. Um, so just reading what y'all are talking about. Did y'all do what I was suggesting before we get started, which was look up images of the vault of the Adepti on Google or whatever it is you use to research these things? Did you guys look up pictures of that? And while I'm waiting to see what y'all are saying, Derek completely finished the uh, the link, the homepage, whatever it is you call, uh, to uh, organize the retreat. I am going to post it in a couple of days. Uh, I want the magnum opus people to get first shot at it, which is why we're doing it kind of the way we are. It'll come out on here, and then if there's anything left, if there are any spots left, we will open it to the general public. But you guys are the main, our supporters. So that's why we like to make sure that y'all get first crack at everything. In the meantime, now we were talking about looking up images of the Vault of the Adepti, and I looked up a few and I saved them because I knew some people weren't going to do it for whatever reasons, but I wanted to show you if you can see this, just because I want you to see what I'm talking about when we're talking about this, because this is very important. And I want to talk about how this ties into what people call celestial ascent. Technically, first off, let's start with that for a second. First off, when you're talking about celestial ascent, you're talking about the exact same thing that's described in the Bible. Not only in the Bible, but also in Hebrew mystical traditions like the Merkabah practices, if you've ever heard of those. It's what the book of Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel, that's what he was doing. It's what caused him to have all of those visions. But what were his visions of? Where did he say he went? What did he say he saw? Ezekiel said that he went to the throne of God, that he ascended all the way up to heaven and stood before the throne of God. It's what he describes in the book of Ezekiel. And a lot of the other like more mystically oriented prophets, they're describing the same thing. There was another guy besides Ezekiel, and his name is slipping my mind right now, that kind of did the same thing. But and it's not just even in the Bible. It's in pretty much all Western magical traditions. This is what the point of all this stuff is. The point of everything we're doing in the Golden Dawn, if you really understand this stuff, here's the thing: most people don't. Most people, they don't understand it as a whole. And part of it is just because they just focus on little bits and pieces and parts. But when you're doing these practices, you do exactly what we take you through the process of in Magnum Opus. I call it Jacob's ladder because if you remember in the Old Testament, Jacob's ladder is this ladder that he has this vision of that goes from earth all the way up to heaven, and that there's angels coming and going on this ladder. Whenever we work our way through this material, the way we're doing in Magnum Opus, the way we're doing in the Golden Dawn, the way we're doing in any of these traditional magical systems, is we are gradually, for lack of any other way to put it, keep in mind that none of this stuff is going to be completely accurate because we're putting something into words that can't be conveyed in words. It's something that has to be experienced. But we can describe it in a whole bunch of different ways. And it's almost like giving people different views of it. Like we can talk about it, for example, as the Merkabah practice, or we can talk about it as ascending the tree of life back to Kether, or we can talk about it as celestial ascent in the way the prophet Ezekiel described it. But all of these things are starting with the elements, earth, water, air, fire, and then ascending through the planets, the 7 planets, up through the zodiac, on and on up. So what all of these things are describing. They're just using different metaphors to do it. The Jewish Merkaba practices, for example, they use the metaphor of a chariot. They say that you're taken up to heaven on this chariot. No, Michelle, it's not really anything to do with what people are calling now plant medicine or plant magic or any of that. Not dismissing any of that stuff at all, but at the same time, none of that stuff is necessary to experience this. None of it. My, I guess, kind of axe to grind with stuff like that is that people have always sought a shortcut to doing this. Always. And this is why they give in to superstition. It's why they give in to, things like even abusing plant medicine, stuff like that. People want there to be some pill they can take, some liquid they can drink, some guru that can put a blessing on them, some magical talisman that they can buy from, some store somewhere. They want something that's going to grant them enlightenment, grant them the understanding of all this. Is not going to happen, period, ever, never. It is not possible to experience what we are describing, experiencing when we do these practices through any shortcut. It only takes place in one way and one way alone, and that is hard work. That is it. All of this comes down to, do you understand what you're doing, and are you willing to put in the hard work and the hours of commitment and discipline and dedication and all that stuff that it's going to take to get there? It's what all of this, it's what it all comes down to, is there are no shortcuts. Period. If there were, I would be the first in line. Would have at one point in my life. I really don't care anymore. Which we'll get to hopefully when we're talking about this too. What I mean by I don't care anymore is because kind of after you go through this journey at least once, hopefully several times, what happens more and more and more is that you realize that when you get to the very end of this journey, what you experience is that God is here. God is here and now. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to be. There's nowhere to escape from. You are in the middle of the mind of God right now. And then you go even beyond that and you realize that this is going to sound sacrilegious to some people, but it's absolutely true. You are God, and there is nothing outside of you that can help you. Just like I was just saying about how people want a shortcut. They want a pill or a potion or a blessing from a guru or whatever it is that's going to propel them towards enlightenment without having to do the years of hard work. Really praying to things outside of ourselves is number one. We don't want to do that. Number one, there's nothing outside yourself that you can rely on. There is nothing outside of you that can give you anything you don't already have. And I know that sounds confusing and maybe even sounds a little crazy right now, but it'll make sense if you go far enough on this path. But my point with this stuff is it's all the same thing. They're all describing the exact same process, just using different metaphors. Well, what's a metaphor? A metaphor is symbolism. That's exactly what the vault of the Adepti is. It is one giant symbol. And it is a symbol for the exact same thing that the Merkaba is a symbol for in Jewish esoteric practices. In the Merkaba system, they say that you construct this chariot, you're taken to heaven on this chariot. And in the Golden Dawn, they talk about the vault of the Adepti. In Christianity, they talk about, the body of transfiguration, the body that Christ revealed to the disciples during the transfiguration event on the Bible. So you've got all these different names for things, and a lot of people don't realize that they're all talking about the exact same thing. So what are they talking about? When we are talking about the Merkaba, or when we are talking about the vault of the Adepti, we're talking about your energy system. We're talking about your aura, for to use New Age terminology. We're talking about, really, it sounds cheesy to say aura, to use that word in modern times, but it's just a very New Agey way of saying your soul. Your energy system is part of your soul. What you are doing is strengthening and refining yourself, your own energy system. You are the vault of the Adepti. I've written about this before, but I didn't write about it in these words. I did not write about it. I didn't call it the vault of the Adepti. What I called it when I wrote about it, if you've read Angels and Archangels, is the celestial lotus. When you do the celestial lotus ritual, you are doing the exact same thing. Let me show you some pictures here. Hopefully you can see this. See this here, this room. So this is the room right here. This part over here to the side, this is the door that's open. When this room is closed, you see here's more walls, looking at it just from inside of it. In this one you can actually see, those are the walls again. In this one you can actually see there is a coffin in the middle of the temple. Here is what it looks like, the whole thing. So you see it's inside a room, and it's constructed separate from the room. And I do know people who have constructed these things. There are some of them, in modern times. There are orders now, and not even particularly great orders, just some that at least have done this. They have created this vault of the Adepti. And you see it looks kind of like it's just this closed off, like a little room inside a room. The thing you can't really tell from any of these pictures, look at that. The thing you can't really tell from any of these pictures is that if you were standing in this room, Holly says, is there any way we can visit? If you join an order that has one, that's the only way. The only people who ever go inside these things are people who are members of the order that have constructed it. And part of that is because they want to contain very specific energies in it. It's not something that they're just going to open to the public and just have all kinds of energy come through it. It's meant to be a very specific holy place. But if you were standing inside of it, what you would see is that there are 7 walls. Like it's shaped in a what's a geometric shape that has 7 sides? I can't remember. Septagram, is that what it is? Whatever it is, it's a 7-sided room. That's why it has to be built inside of another room. It's because heptagram, Gannicus says heptagram. So if you were standing in this room, you would be standing inside of a 7-sided heptagram. One of those walls represents each of the planets. When we're working our way through this, when we're going through this work, first we work our way through the 4 elements, and then we work our way through the 7 planets. The 7 planets, that's why there's 7 walls. They even refer to the walls inside of this vault as the Mercury wall, the Venus wall. As a matter of fact, the door is always in the Venus wall. And there's symbolism in that as well. But there's a Saturn wall, you know, all of the planets have their own wall in this thing. And what you see, there's certain rituals they'll do where, like, for example, when you're first taken in there, you're taken in and it'll be dark. And then they'll flip the light on and you'll see, you know, all of these images painted around you. And they're painted in a very special kind of a very special combination of colors that in the Golden Dawn they call flashing colors. What those do, what those cause is first they turn on the light, you know, you're in this dark room, they turn on the light and you see all of these images around you. And then they turn off the light again and you're still going to see all of those images like burned into your retina all around you. All of those planetary symbols, all of those elemental symbols. It's like they're still in the air around you because they're burned into your sight. Well, if this is symbolism, what's it symbolic of? I said your soul, but what's it telling you? You know, keep in mind there's there's different ways of dividing the soul up. Different traditions divide the different parts into a different number of layers. But when you're talking about the Western mystery, Western esoteric or magical traditions, you are almost always going to see it divided into 7 parts. That's what the 7 classical planets were referring to. As above, so below, as within, so without. The reason that they didn't use, you know, like modern planets like Neptune and Pluto in the classical system is because they do not correspond to anything within us. With the Western mystery tradition, they divided the soul as a way of understanding this stuff into 7 parts. And each of those parts are ascribed ascribed a planetary correspondence. Well, if you look, and I'm going to go back and show you one of these pictures again. If you look at these photos, what you'll see, look at all those images painted on the walls. You really see 3 things for the most part. You see planetary symbols, you see astrological symbols, and you see Hebrew letters. You see those things all around the walls. Well, you can kind of almost disregard the Hebrew letters in the first place because they are, it's going to make any magic you do. They are a complete system of magic unto themselves. If you learn Hebrew and how to use Hebrew, you can use Hebrew to invoke and banish and manifest things and everything else using just the alphabet. But the thing about this language or this alphabet is it wasn't understood the way we understand our alphabet now. Like we have almost no understanding of like any kind of symbolism or anything else behind our own alphabet. Whereas in the Hebrew alphabet, every single letter was given like a tremendous amount of correspondence and things to meditate on and all that kind of stuff. But what it boils down to, long story short, is each of those Hebrew letters still, for the most part, represents one of 2 things. Either a planetary energy or an astrological energy. You know, some of those letters, one of those letters will correspond to fire, one to earth, one to air, one to water, one to Venus, Mercury, Saturn, on and on. So really, letters of the Hebrew alphabet are kind of just another kind of symbolism for the energies represented in planetary symbolism and astrological symbolism. Is this making sense so far? Okay. So what are we looking at then? When we look at this temple, when we look at this vault, what are we looking at? What is it symbolizing? It is symbolizing. You remember when Jesus was getting ready to be crucified and he said something to people about how if you destroy this temple, I will rebuild it in 3 days. And, most people think that's like some kind of great mystery. Like, what does that mean? We know obviously he wasn't talking about the actual physical temple because he couldn't rebuild that in 3 days. What he was talking about was his soul, his aura, his energy system. He would rebuild it or return to this world in 3 days. Even the temples in the Old Testament, like the Temple of Solomon, the Temple of Solomon is describing the exact same thing that the Vault of the Adepti is describing. The Temple of Solomon, the Vault of the Adepti, the Merkaba, all of those things are describing your aura, your soul. What you are looking at when you look at pictures or when you're taken into a Vault of the Adept, the symbolism you're seeing is showing you what to do to experience the celestial ascent. What you're doing is working with each level or layer of your soul in succession in order to bring about certain changes in consciousness. The thing about these people, whenever they talk about ascending to heaven, they're not talking about in the physical form. I mean, these experiences can be incredibly real. Well, they are real. But they're also not meant to be taken 100% literally. I don't really like talking about a lot of this stuff anymore. Like whenever I was going through this stuff, whenever I was experiencing some of these things. But I'm bringing this up just to say that, I experienced some of these exact same things by doing these methods. By doing the methods of ceremonial magic, I experienced the exact same things that are described in the book of Ezekiel. But if someone were looking at me, they wouldn't have seen my body float off into the clouds. If someone saw me at the time when I was experiencing these things, what they would have seen is someone probably standing in the middle of the living room floor with their eyes closed after waving their hands around and talking to the walls for a few hours. They would have seen somebody just standing there, maybe in some kind of trance state. My body didn't go anywhere. But people take these stories like super literally. And the reason I bring this up is because I have never come across anyone who has experienced these things who does this work exactly the way that modern orders pass it on. And what I'm saying is, I have not seen anyone experience these things the way that modern orders pass them on. What I mean by that, the way modern orders pass them on is kind of what we've been doing with y'all to a certain extent in Magnum Opus. Like we start off having you over and over and over invoke Earth. First you do the self-initiation ritual. That was the first thing we started with. And then you go on to invoke Earth over and over and over daily. And then you go on to invoke air over and over daily. And then you go on to invoke water over and over daily. And then we go through the planetary stuff, and you do that over and over and over. Now, that stuff, like I said, is very important, and it's teaching you a lot of different things. It's teaching you how to do magic and how to visualize. It's like doing calisthenics for your aura. You're like purifying and refining aspects of yourself, almost like, focusing on a single muscle group, an isolating a muscle whenever you're working out at the gym. But I don't believe that it's possible, from my own experience and from what I've seen in other people, I don't believe it's possible to experience the things that most people want to experience in magic just doing it that way. I think you have to do what allowed me to experience it, and what the prophets and everybody else are talking about was invoking it all at once. That's what the vault of the Adepti, that's what the symbolism is showing you. It's showing you all of those symbols represent the energies that you have to invoke into yourself at once, in one setting. You are the vault of the Adepti. It's showing you, what is the vault of the Adepti made up? It's made up of all these different kinds of energies. Well, if you are the vault of the Adepti, then you want to be made up of all those different energies. So the way you do it all at once is by doing what I call the celestial lotus in Angels and Archangels. That's all I described. And there's a bunch of different ways of doing this that range in power. The easiest form is just to do the lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram, and then invoking all of the archangels around you. And then the second way, the more powerful way, would be to do the lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram, and then immediately on top of that, you would do the greater invoking of the hexagram of soul. And then immediately on top of that, you would do the supreme invoking ritual of the pentagram. And then you would invoke all of those angels, all of the elemental angels, all of the planetary angels, all of the zodiacal angels, the angels of the deacons, the angels of the Shem operation, and the angels of the fixed stars. If you do all of that way, it's going to take you a while to do it. It used to take me, when I would do it early in the morning, late at night, whatever, it would take me about 3 hours, sometimes 3 hours to go through the whole thing. But what happens when you do this, when you build the vault of the Adepti within yourself, within your energy system, within your aura, it causes some sort of radical change in your consciousness. It brings you face to face with what the prophets called the throne of God. And it does, it absolutely does. That is exactly what I experienced. You reach a kind of breaking point almost. It's not a very good way to describe it, but I can't think of another way to say it. But you reach a tipping point where you experience something that there are no other words to describe. That's y'all know, whenever I talked about seeing the face of God, and that the more you try to look at the face of God, the more you just see features of the devil. But then when you try to look at the devil, you just more and more see the features of God. And you see this all over the place. Like you see it in the Bible. It tells you this in the Bible. We just don't see it. We just don't pay attention to it. There's a scripture, I can't remember exactly where it is, but you can Google this in 2 seconds and find it anywhere, where God says, I create both the good and the evil. God says this. I believe it's in the book of Isaiah. Pretty sure it is. Somewhere in Isaiah, God says, I create both the good and the evil. God says in the Bible, I create evil. Who creates evil? The devil. Even in the Golden Dawn, in the neophyte ritual, there's a prayer that said, yes, Tyler. Tyler says, I am the Lord of darkness and light. That's exactly the words from the neophyte ritual. The neophyte ritual is let me see. I think I have it real quick. I'll read it to you so I don't mangle it. You can see exactly what I'm talking about. So the neophyte ceremony, there's a little prayer in it that says, Holy art thou, Lord of the universe. Holy art thou, whom nature hath not formed. Holy art thou, the vast and mighty one, Lord of the light and of the darkness. Not just Lord of the light, Lord of the darkness. Who's the Lord of darkness? Who creates evil? This thing is telling you that it is both God and the devil. But we try to split them apart. And that kind of symbolizes, that's kind of a reflection of what we're doing inside ourselves. I talked to one time about, I can't remember if it was on here, if it was during one of the Magnum Opus groups or somewhere, but one of the things we were talking about is how, just to put it bluntly, you're an ass. Everybody's an ass. But we only want ourselves to see the aspects of ourselves that we think makes us a good person. We blind ourselves to, the parts of ourselves that are less than perfect, to the parts of ourselves that are causing all the problems in our lives. We don't want to see that. We just want to see how good we are. So I'm sure there's some kind of psychological term for that, repression or suppression or something, who knows? I don't really know a lot about psychology. But whenever we do it, what happens is we also, as within, so without, we split God and the devil into two different things. Just like we split ourselves into two different things. There's the good person that we can see and that we want to show to the world, and there's the bad person that we want to suppress and hide. And yeah, Tyler called it the shadow. That's exactly what it is. That's what people are talking about, the shadow. The shadow is the parts of yourselves that you don't want to face. Your shadow is how selfish you are. Your shadow is like how vindictive and petty you can be. And I say this because we've all got those parts within us. But the first step of this process is building the vault of the Adepti. If you build the vault of the Adepti, to use this metaphor, what happens, or to use the Merkaba metaphor, is if you build the vault of the Adepti, or you ride this Merkaba chariot, it will take you to the throne of God. You will experience celestial ascent. And when you get there, and you look into the face of God, you'll see that it's both God and the devil. I don't mean believe this. I don't mean read it in a book. I don't mean, have faith or hope or anything else that any of this is true. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about you will experience it firsthand. You will stand before the throne of God and you will see it. And nobody has to tell you this. Nobody told me this. It doesn't matter if 1,000,000 people tell you this until you experience it yourself. It doesn't do the same thing to you. Once you experience that, the next experience is realizing that all of those things are you. Not only is God and the devil the same thing, but they're both you. You're part of the Holy Trinity. Wasn't there a song, something about that? Can't remember it off the top of my head. It seems like I remember something about that. Can't remember the name of it. I don't know. But once you experience both of these things being you, the next thing you experience is the dissolution of the self. So the next step of the process is you realize God and the devil aren't real. Not in the way most people think. They're parts of you. But you don't exist either. So God, the devil, and you are all illusions. None of these things exist. But two things can be true at the same time. I say that God doesn't exist because when I'm speaking of God in this term, I'm talking about things that, or something that is a concept, a human concept. And we're going to get to this in just a minute about God being a concept. Holly says, is it like we are dreaming? Who is we? Who would be dreaming? There's no one to dream. But that's a good metaphor. You know, I've heard that metaphor used before to describe this world and describe the way it works the way it does. But my mind went blank. Yes, Lucy. Lucy says it's like we're everything and nothing at the same time. That's it. And that's exactly what God is. Not the God of the Old Testament, you know, not the God that's the only way we can really think of it is like a man sitting in the clouds, like an old white-haired man with a beard sitting in the clouds, waiting to throw thunder down on us. I don't mean that. When I say God in this way, what I'm talking about is the animating force that interpenetrates all things, including us, and that we are in right now. Think of it. I've never been a Star Wars fan. I'm not particularly a big, alien person. I just don't find it interesting. I was always more of a what they call sword and sandals type of guy. I like movies like Gladiator or what have you. Repeat what? You got to be more specific, Michelle. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Well, here's the thing, Gannicus. Here's the problem with this scenario. So Gannicus says, would you say this is all simulation theory / modern Gnosticism that we are all permutations of God seeking to have an experience, or rather that we have the God spark in us and fallen and trying to reunite with the source. Here's the thing. When you use that language that we are trying to reunite with the source, the first problem with using that language is it implies that we are separate from source now, and we're not. You have never been separate from God. You have never been separate from source. You could not exist if you were separate from source. You have always been one thing. You have always been one with source. You have always been one with every person, with me, and with every person on here right now. There is nothing that you could do that could ever sever you into something separate from that source. If you were separate from that source, you couldn't exist. There would be no you, because the source is everything. So you could kind of say that that's an illusion. You can't reunite with something that you were never separated from in the first place. And this is the problem with using this kind of language. Like, that's the kind of language that people would normally use when they're describing this stuff, because it's what most people need to understand, or to help them at least, make progress on this path. You have to give them a metaphor that they can understand. So you give them the metaphor that we are trying to reunite with source, and that by doing all this work, it'll bring you up to the point of reuniting with source. You give them that because it's something they can sort of understand. It lets them understand sort of what this work is for. Like, why are we doing this work? And you tell them, well, if you do this work, if you do this rituals, what's going to happen is that you are eventually going to find your way back to God, and you're going to be able to reunite with God, or reunite to the source. But it's almost like a trick, because like I said, there was no part, you cannot be anything but one with source at all times. You are one with source right now. There is nowhere for you to go. There is nothing you can do, nothing that you can do that will ever make you more at one with source than you are right now in this moment. Nothing in the world, because you and source are one. There is no distance between you and source. But we're experiencing an illusion. We're experiencing something that's not exactly true. We are almost like tricking ourselves that we are or could be separate from the unity in some way. Is this making sense, or does this sound like a crazy person? Ganek says, nope, I hope you mean nope, it doesn't sound like a crazy person. Not nope, it doesn't make sense. Exactly. We are the source, but we don't know we're the source. If people do this work, what happens is they realize, when they get to the end of this path, they realize they were always the source. That there was nowhere to go and there was nothing to do. They were always the source. They were always one. That is a better way to say it, I think. Ganek says we are unconscious aspects of God waking up. I think that's a better metaphor for it. But then you could still go off into all kinds of crazy hair-splitting things like, who is there to wake up? If self is an illusion and it never existed in the first place, and that all is actually God, then who's there to wake up? And that's when you get really off into all the Zen stuff. Like, who's watching your thoughts? Like, if we are our thought, if we are our mind, yeah, exactly. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Exactly. But I wanted to read something to you that kind of ties into this tonight. And it is from, once again, Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. And he starts off this little chapter with a question that someone is asking him, and then he goes into the answer. So first I'll read you the question that somebody asked him, and then I'll read his answer to it. The question is, when you say being, are you talking about God? If you are, then why don't you just say it? And his answer is, the word God has become empty of meaning through thousands of years of misuse. I do use it sometimes, but I do so sparingly. By misuse, I mean that people who have never even glimpsed the realm of the sacred, the infinite vastness behind that word, use it with great conviction, as if they knew what they are talking about. Or they argue against it, as if they know what it is that they're denying. This misuse gives rise to absurd beliefs, assertions, and egoic delusions, such as my or our God is the only true God, and your God is false. Or Nietzsche's famous statement, God is dead. The word God has become a closed concept. The moment the word is uttered, a mental image is created, no longer perhaps of an old man with a white beard, but still a mental representation of someone or something outside you. And yes, almost inevitably a male someone or something. Neither God nor being nor any other word can define or explain the ineffable reality behind the word. So the only important question is whether the word is a help or a hindrance in enabling you to experience that toward which it points. Does it point beyond itself to that transcendental reality, or does it lend itself too easily to becoming no more than an idea in your head that you believe in, a mental idol? The word being explains nothing, but God does not. Being, however, has the advantage that it is an open concept. It does not reduce the infinite invisible to a finite entity. It is impossible to form a mental image of it. Nobody can claim exclusive possession of being. It is your very essence, and it is immediately accessible to you as the feeling of your own presence, the realization that I am, that is prior to I am this or I am that. So it is only a small step from the word being to the experience of being. Kind of what he's getting at there, what he's pointing at is whenever you go through all of this stuff and you experience what in magic they call the union of opposites, first you build the vault of the Adepti, which is doing the celestial lotus. It's invoking all of these planetary and astrological energies into your aura over and over and over. That's what you see symbolized in the vault of the Adepti. If you do this consistently, every step of this process will lead you to the next step. If you just do one step and keep doing it over and over, it will lead you to the next step. If you just keep doing the celestial lotus over and over, or building the vault of the Adepti, however you want to describe this stuff, you will inevitably be brought before the throne of God. It's what the book of Revelations is about. It's what the book of Ezekiel is about. If you stand before the throne of God, you will experience the union of opposites, meaning you'll see all these things are the same thing. After you experience the union of opposites, it will inevitably lead you to the dissolution of self, understanding that there really is no you, that what you think is you is just a mask that you use to interact with the world. The last thing you realize is that there's nowhere to go. Just like I said, you can't ever be separate from Source. You can't ever be separate from God. if you can't ever be separate from that, then there's nowhere to go. There's nothing for you to work your way towards other than what you have always been, beneath the mask of the persona. Tyler says, is that a terrifying experience? There's a lot of terrifying experiences in magic, a lot of them. But that's it's supposed to be. It's like the hero's journey. The hero, like in Joseph Campbell's stories, the hero gets a call to adventure and he goes out on this quest and he has to go into some very dark places. And then if he survives and comes back, he comes back with wisdom and knowledge that he didn't have before, and that he then integrates into his life in a new way. He comes back to the world and he integrates what he has learned into his life. But he does have a normal life. He comes back into this world. In the 10 ox herding pictures in Buddhism, the very last ox herding picture is returns to the village with helping hands. That's the last step of our journey. We return to the village. We return to our lives with helping hands. Helping what? Yes, Tyler, you are the hero. That's it, David. David says, I am my brother's keeper. Not only are you your brother's keeper, you are the keeper of every man, woman, and child on this planet. Derek talks about this stuff sometimes in Magnum Opus when we're talking about the Orthodox Church and how, there are monks on Mount Athos at all times praying for the safety and protection of the world. Basically surrounding the world in a protective energy. They have dedicated their lives to being their brother's keeper, to being the keeper of the whole world. We are indeed guardian angels, but we are unconscious angels. And what doing this work does is wakes us up. We become conscious angels. That's why we return to the village with helping hands. That's what angels do. They help. That help may not look like what most people think it looks like. People have a very, very weird ass image of these things in modern times. They change the stuff to fit almost like their political ideals of what's good and what's bad, and it gets all tangled up in social justice work and all this kind of stuff. And it can be those things. I'm not saying it's not, but for most people, it's not. Most people are just like posting something on Instagram or something, which makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. But what it means returning to the village with helping hands is you will do something. You learn things that make you a better person. What do I mean by better person? I'm not talking about in a religious or moral sense of the word. I'm talking about that will help you reach your full potential in this lifetime. You learn something that helps you come closer to doing that, be it, like in my case, it was magic and martial arts. In other people's cases, it'll be something else entirely. It could be dance, could be how to speak a different language, whatever it is. But they will pass that on to other people in some way or another, and it will help those other people to achieve more of their full potential. One time I asked my Zen teacher when I was in prison, I asked him, I said, why do Tibetan Buddhists have all this stuff? We were Zen Buddhist. We were Rinzai Zen Buddhists. We didn't use anything. We didn't have prayer wheels. We didn't make mandalas. We didn't have, malas, those prayer beads. Like, we don't use anything. In Rinzai Zen, you don't use anything. And you don't use any special method, like all the visualizations and stuff. Like, think about Tibetan Buddhism, how many gods and dakinis and, all these different entities that they have and they pray to and that they do these rituals for and all this. In Zen, there's nothing. Nothing and no one outside of you. You just sit there and you try to the best of your ability to be in the present moment. In the beginning, the only tool you use is your breath. Follow your breath in, follow your breath out. You do that over and over and over. And every time you realize you've started to think about something or whatever it is, you just come back to your breath. Follow your breath in, follow your breath out. And I asked him, why do they have all this stuff? Why do they use all this stuff? And we don't have anything. We don't use any of that stuff. And he said, in Tibetan Buddhism, they have to climb all the way to the top of this mountain, a step at a time. And when they get to the very top of it, which may take years, may take lifetimes, they can fly off. He said, what we're doing, on the other hand, is we are just flying up to the top of the mountain. And when we land at the top of the mountain, then we have to walk down. We have to figure out how to climb all the way back down this mountain. We're all taking the same journey. But some of us are doing one part of this journey first, and some of us are doing another part of this journey first. We're doing the exact same thing in magic as the Tibetan Buddhists are. We're using all of these rituals and all of these methods to climb the mountain. Because just to jump and land on top of the mountain is very, very, very hard. Something that doesn't suit most people. Most people are not going to be able to do it. It's like telling someone, be enlightened right now. And they're like, oh, okay, why did I ever walk around in a state of delusion in the first place? That's the equivalent of like flying to the top of the mountain. But more of what he meant was the same thing that Eckhart Tolle talks about. Eckhart Tolle doesn't give any big, grand rituals or any of that kind of stuff to make your way up the mountain. He just says over and over and over, be here now. Same thing Ram Dass said, be here now, be here now, be here now. That's what he meant by flying to the top of the mountain. It's like Tibetan Buddhists and ceremonial magicians both go through this whole process to realize there's nowhere to go and there's nothing to do because you have always been one with Source, that you can never be anything else. Zen Buddhists, on the other hand, practice just being here now. To not making a distinction between self and other, between self and God, self and Source. They skip past all of that. They skip past all the rituals. Once you get to the end of these rituals, you realize that here and now is the most important thing, that this is the center of the mind of God. There's nothing to escape in this world. This is it. You are in heaven right now. Right now, you are either in heaven or you are in hell, one or the other. Most people are in hell, to be quite honest. But the people who can see the beauty of this realm and to see that, this is the Garden of Eden that we're supposed to be shaping and taking care of and helping create, helping further the creation of, you realize that this is also heaven. There's nowhere to go. Nowhere but here and now. There's no work to do. There's nothing to be reunited with. Is this making sense again? I got to stop my ass. Does this make sense in the way that I'm like the reason that I wanted to like equate this or start talking about the vault of the Adepti? Like, is that clear in what I'm saying to you? That the external vault, like if you actually build that thing in your basement, that's fine and good. Yeah, it'll serve its purposes or whatever, but it's not the true vault. It's not the true vault of the Adepti. You are the true vault of the Adepti. You are the vault. All you have to do is invoke those energies into yourself, and you do them all simultaneously the way you do when you're doing the celestial lotus. If you do that, one thing leads to the other and the rest kind of takes. Yes, that's exactly right, Genicus. Genicus says it's the same as King Solomon's temple in masonry. Exactly. It's a metaphor for you. Exactly. The vault of the Adepti is a metaphor for you. Celestial ascent is nothing but a metaphor for changes in consciousness that you will experience as you go through this process. Exactly, sunshine. The map is not the territory. Yes. We've been on here for over an hour already. That's crazy. I sat here rambling like a crazy person for an hour. I hope y'all feel like you got something out of this. I wanted to go back a little bit tonight and like go into more of a hardcore ceremonial magic kind of talk about it, and you know, going back to our roots of what we're doing, like how you can use this stuff. And I wanted to just kind of go back to that tonight and touch on why those rituals are important. All right, but I am going to shut up, but I will talk to you in a couple of days. If you haven't got the link yet, I know most of you haven't. Most of you have not got the link yet for the retreat. I will post that in the next few days. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Genicus. All right, I'm going to shut up and get off here as usual. Thank you guys so much for being on here, for supporting me, for being with me. I do not take that for granted, and it means a great deal to me. Good night, and I'll talk to you very soon.